By 2030, all of the country's 74 million baby boomers will be 65 or older, according to data from the U.S. Census Bureau. This big shift in demographics means a greater demand for caregivers, senior housing, and healthcare services. It's well studied that with age comes a greater prevalence of diseases like cancer, diabetes, and other ailments. But what if it was possible to slow down the biological clock, or even reverse the negative effects of aging? It seems like a plot in a sci-fi film, but this field is of big focus in today's research world, especially as millions of Americans enter the later stage of life.
In the last really 20 to 25 years, we've seen a rapid acceleration in our understanding of the factors that drive aging and aging-related illness, and that is really tremendously exciting to think about and to observe. Aging or age is the most important risk factor for almost every disease we deal with in adult medicine. I'm a cardiologist. Age is the most important risk factor for heart disease. It's not smoking, it's not your cholesterol, it's not diabetes, it's your age. And age is also the most important risk factor for almost every other disease that we deal with. So something about age that drives the development of disease.
That's Dr. Douglas Vaughn, chairman of the Department of Medicine at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine and the inaugural director of the new Potosnak Longevity Institute at the university. It's important to note that scientists don't fully understand every aspect of how aging works and why some people biologically age at different rates than others. When we say biological age, what exactly do we mean? Well, chronological age is the number of years since you were born, but biological or physiological age is determined by a different set of characteristics.
There are factors that influence the rate of aging in all of us in terms of our ability to regenerate and repair our bodies and our tissues. And we can measure your physiological age in a variety of different ways, including things like how fast a person walks or their grip strength. There are other factors that can be measured relatively easily that change with age, including the variability of your heart rate and your blood pressure. And more recently, it's been clear that there are other molecular components that can be measured that reflect biological age, including the pattern of chemical alterations in your DNA. A process of methylation takes place in all of us that impacts upon the functionality of our genome.
There are many different factors at play as the body gets older. For some, chronological and biological age don't line up. In northeastern Indiana, there's a small percentage of people within an old order Amish community that can be called SuperAgers. This term applies to those in their 90s who are still mentally sharp and overall very healthy. Scientists at Northwestern have honed in on a subset of this Amish population because they carry a unique genetic variant that seems to slow biological aging.
We know that there are about 20,000 members of the community. Something over 10% of them carry this genetic variant. They don't know it. It's present at birth because it's in their genome. They spend their whole life with half the normal level of PI1 in their blood. And we know that that has a terrific impact upon their overall health and well-being. They're protected from diabetes. They have lower fasting insulin levels. Their cardiovascular system retains its juvenile characteristics. That is, their blood vessels retain their flexibility, and they actually live about 10 years longer than their unaffected siblings or kindred. So everyone that carries this genetic variant can trace their ancestry back to a single individual who married into the community in the middle of the 1800s. He had 16 children and 148 grandchildren. And you fast forward 7 generations, you can do the math and figure out how many of his progeny are present in the population.
Vaughn says that there's still a great deal scientists can learn from this group. In fact, there are already some therapies that aim to replicate what these people were born with.
There are drugs already in development that can lower your PI1 level in your blood. A small company in Japan out of Tokyo has a drug already in phase 3 in clinical trials in humans. So I wouldn't be surprised if a drug like that someday is used to treat or prevent aging-related illness in human beings. I don't think the FDA is going to have much appetite for an anti-aging therapy certainly not in the next 10 or 20 years. But if there are drugs that could be developed that impact upon aging, but also prevent aging-related disease, say heart disease or diabetes or lung disease, well, then it would be possible to get specific indications and approvals for drugs that have those kinds of properties.
And there are other drugs out there being studied as well. Vaughn says one drug, metformin, which is commonly used as an anti-diabetic medication, has shown promise in anti-aging experiments in mice. Another strategy in studying anti-aging is to try to understand why certain people tend to age faster than others. One researcher who's studying this is Dr. Frank Palella, the Associate Director of the Potosnak Longevity Institute at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. Within this institute, he's also the director of the HIV and Aging Center. Palella researches why the HIV virus, even when well controlled with medication, speeds up aging and shortens people's peak health.
It's not so much a shortening of survival as a shortening of their health. We talk about lifespan, and the innovations and advances we've made in the treatment, the medication treatments with HIV, have really extended the lifespan in optimal circumstances of persons living with HIV to almost approach that of persons without HIV. But when we talk about health span, the proportion of their lives spent sort of in peak health, at peak functioning, that is what's shortened. And it's difficult to put numbers on that in general, but across studied populations, it's on the order of possibly a decade to a decade and a half. The age at which, say, frailty or dementia or heart disease might take place in persons even living with well-controlled HIV compared to persons without is about that magnitude.
Palella says the negative bodily effects of the HIV virus itself make it a good model for studying aging and finding new treatments. Some of these interventions are already being tested on patients living with HIV.
One of the very largest studies in the world being undertaken at many places, we're part of it at Northwestern, involves giving persons with HIV, even who don't have an indication to receive it by current guidelines, a lipid lowering, a cholesterol lowering medication, one of the statins, and to assess the effects of the statin on overall health, levels of inflammation, cardiovascular functioning in persons with HIV who are healthy at this point, because statins in general have an anti-inflammatory component. There has been other work among persons with HIV, and again, this is on a much smaller scale, looking at interventions with other types of anti-inflammatory or anticoagulation, anti-blood clotting medications.
Scientists are hopeful that this ongoing research will provide more answers on aging, but looking at here and now, what can people do to slow down their biological clock?
Maintaining healthy habits, avoiding things that are bad for you, engaging in physical exercise, weight control, smoking cessation, cancer screening, all of these things will allow an individual to be a good candidate for any additional interventions, be they medications or other aspects of technology or physical or mental conditioning undertakings that will prime those individuals to be the best candidates possible to engage in these additional interventions from which they could get even more benefit.
Vaughn says that as people get older, there's a lot of products out there in the anti-aging market that make big promises. It's important to take this information with a grain of salt.
I think there are a lot of charlatans out there in the world that present everything from magic coffee beans to who knows what. You got to stick with the science. You got to follow rigorous research. The reality is upon us that we can actually impact upon the aging process, and our children and our grandchildren are going to get to be the beneficiaries of that.
To learn more about innovations in aging research and our guests, Dr. Douglas Vaughn and Dr. Frank Palella, head to viewpointsradio.org to find links to resources and the new Potosnak Longevity Institute at Northwestern University. For more behind the scenes, search Viewpoints Radio on Twitter and Facebook. This segment was written and produced by Amira Zaveri. I'm Gary Price. Coming up on Viewpoints.
When you are defined as your roles, what ends up happening is that we often lose ourselves. We lose our identity. For years, I wasn't called Eve anymore. I was just called Zach's mom.
Understanding the many roles we play in life. Then,
squeeze, I feel like a term I picked up when I started really getting into conventions, and squeeze is to be so excited about something that you can't contain it.
Appreciating the geeky world of fandom. I'm Marty Peterson.
and I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.